Scoot over.
Councilmember problems.
If you speak, you're going to be on camera.
I'm not speaking.
Yeah,
Right.
Okay.
In what world do we believe that?
All right. Get this fired back up. Okay. We are on the air, and it is 4:03, so we'll go ahead and get started and see if any members of the council decide to roll in while we're going. We've got a couple items on the agenda today, so I'd like to welcome everybody to the Community Planning and Transportation Committee for Thursday, September 23rd. Our first item on the agenda, as it usually is are we doing this one or what's on the agenda?
I have just a brief comment on the transit
Okay.
report. Mr.
Our
Chair.
public transit ridership report. So just for those that might be following along that aren't familiar, in this committee every month we get an update on the public transit ridership. We did this even before we took over the system when it was still being run by CART. But it's an opportunity to take a look every month and see how our public transit system is doing when it comes to ridership. Are there any issues with bus stops, with anything that might be related to public transit in Norman? So it's always a good opportunity for the public to send in questions or comments, observations, anything like that we can address in the committee. So we've got a staff report on transit ridership.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Filling in for Taylor Johnson, who is on vacation this week. Sorry about that. I'm here with Jesse Rush from Embark. As you know, Embark manages our operations every day. Jesse spends many hours in Norman on the daily operation, so any questions there, he'll be happy to take those. Taylor did a nice job with his staff report for you. Again, this year, would just mention a few little minor items here. We are finishing our ride-alongs tomorrow, so thank you for those who have joined us. We welcome others. I know we've got 3 or 4 RSVPs tomorrow, and
I think Taylor and I are going on our own next
Right.
Friday, I think.
and again, we're happy. That's in there. We're happy to do that.
Yeah.
Anyone that ever wants to do a ride-along, we're happy to do that anytime. We love for people to really experience it. You have to experience it, I think, before you understand what our bus system really is like. So we'll do that. But tomorrow's our last official one. Had a pretty good turnout. Had lots of anyone that came really enjoyed it. So we appreciated having them with us. We continue with our COVID precautions. Again, we are federally mandated to do things that other agencies are not. So masks are still required. We're still doing social distancing, capacity limitations on the buses, barriers for the drivers. So it's a little different on a federally funded transit system than it is anywhere else because the federal mandates are still in place for transit. I was out touring our transit maintenance facility this morning. It is looking really good, really exciting. We are hoping to get in there on November 15th. So kind of keep your calendars open for ribbon cutting around the middle of November. We'll be sending out more information on that as we have it. And then just some updates on the grants. We have ordered our 2 electric buses, so we're excited about that. It is about a 1-year build time, so we still need to keep the old buses running for another year or so. But excited about starting to get some new fleet into the system, which we desperately need. So happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments from committee members about public transit? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Item 2 on our agenda today is a continued discussion regarding protected bicycle lanes. It's a topic I think brought forward last year before the pandemic really set in, and asked our bicycle advisory committee to take a look. As we've continued to add new bike lanes in Norman, or building bike lanes really, I've heard a lot of questions or comments from people around town asking about protected bike lanes, or can we do more than just a painted stripe to separate, because some of our bike lanes are on some pretty busy streets that do have high speeds. So that's kind of the genesis of where this had come from, at least from this committee anyway. So I think we have a presentation and some information to look at.
Thank you.
Chairman. David Riesland, Transportation Engineer for the city. I'm going to co-present with Hal Cantwell, the Chair of the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We kind of learned about this presentation at the last minute, so to speak, and because of what's happened, and you'll see in a few slides, there really hasn't been a lot of work done on this topic, but it is coming to the forefront real
Kind of was
soon.
just looking for an update on where
Right.
we're at, just since COVID disrupted everything as far as committees.
Especially committees that meet once a month for an
exactly.
hour, it threw a big wrench into those committees.
Yeah.
Our committee, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it was a struggle at times.
Yeah.
So we learned about the desire to study more about protected bike lanes just over a year ago, September of last year. And again, there is the stripe, but there's a desire to have more than just the stripe that separates the bike lane from the vehicular lane. We don't currently have any right now, but the staff liaisons at that September 2020 meeting were instructed to have the Bicycle Advisory Committee bring this up to onto their radar as soon as possible. Following that meeting in September of 2020, our next BAC meeting was on October 12th. Fortunately or unfortunately, we were still meeting virtually at that time on Zoom. It's difficult to do business like this in a virtual environment. You really kind of need to see the people and interact that way. But we did introduce the topic of bicycle lanes at that October meeting, and it was listed as an activity for future meetings. At the time, the Bicycle Advisory Committee was very heavily involved in an update to the city cycling map. It had not been updated in years, and that was kind of the priority before we got this priority given to us. So we were trying to get through that. At the November meeting, the city cycling map was still the main topic for the committee, but we did say that we would officially take up the topic in December. But what happened in December is the legislature decided that we couldn't meet virtually anymore, so we lost the December, January, and February meetings. Those cancellations kind of extinguished the momentum that we had for the city cycling map, as well as the protected bike lane topic. We returned to virtual meetings in March and continued that way through May. It's interesting to note that we also had some, that's on the next slide, I believe. The city cycling map continued to dominate the topics at BAC meetings in March and April. In May, we actually had an emergency topic. Not that protected bike lanes were not an emergency topic, but the 24th Avenue project was trying to get to a point where it was going to wrap up, and there needed to be a decision about what to do with the green bike lanes. There were issues with the green material, with the epoxy to apply the green material. They were having trouble securing the materials, and they wanted to know what did we want to do. So we brought that to the BAC in May, and we reached the decision of what we should do. There's plenty of issues with the green material in bike lanes, from maintenance, from being just magnets for road debris, things like that.
It's very expensive.
Plus it's very expensive, and maybe those funds could be spent in better ways. A little bit about the green bike lanes. They kind of came in with a little fanfare, I think, and I think they were real popular at the beginning, but I think that popularity waned when people saw, again, it was any trash that blows around the road, those little glass beads sticking up there were just attractors for everything, and it's hard to keep them clean. It's hard with the street sweepers that we have to clean those properly. You almost need a special street sweeper to do that. Maintenance was a problem because we couldn't physically store the epoxy that you need to put it down because it has such a short shelf life, and it requires so much of the bead material. Finding a place to store bead material was extremely challenging. So with all of those issues, we agreed that we would move forward with something other than the green bike lanes. And the picture at the lower right was taken from one of our video detection cameras at Robinson and 24th Avenue, and it shows that the green bike lanes are not there. What we decided, what the committee recommended that we do, instead of going with the green, it had the traditional bike lane symbols in it to try to provide more awareness that there was a bike lane. We doubled up the bike symbols. So we got twice as many of those for essentially the same or lower price. Another thing that sort of happened in this whole March to May timeframe when we were meeting still virtually, we had 3 new members of the Bicycle Advisory Committee come on board. Thrilled to have them because sometimes we had trouble achieving a quorum to be able to have a meeting. But these people came in with no knowledge of the cycling map that we were trying to get finished, or the protected bike lanes, or even green bike lanes. Really, they might have ridden on some of them, but didn't experience them from the committee's perspective. So those 3 members started attending in April. Even with the new members, we didn't have a quorum for June, so we lost another meeting. At the July meeting, it was really a meeting that was taken over by infrastructure and pending changes to bicycle laws. You kind of get sidetracked like that, and it's hard to get back on the rails, I guess, so to speak, right, Hal? The infrastructure discussion was the first at that time that the new members had heard about the need to address future treatment of bike lanes, so we were trying to bring the new members up to speed as well. August came around. Again, the main topic was trying to finish that darn city cycling map. We got real close, extremely close. We thought we were going to have it in September, but I know we're going to have it in October, right? And that will be a huge project to get for this Bicycle Advisory Committee to get finished. And with the completion in October, there is a commitment that it will take up protected bike lanes right after that. It's interesting to note that Hal and I both attended a meeting at ACOG in August, where there was a presentation given by Oklahoma City on their bike standards, and they touched on protected bike lanes. So we kind of got a little bit of education that way. Their standards, we think, could be modified slightly to address what we think Norman needs to move forward with. But we learned a lot of kind of their lessons with protected bike lanes. And I'll let Hal take over from here.
We did very seriously take the kind of suggestion or the idea that bike lanes in Norman were not meeting all the needs of the community. There was perception there. You have a wide range, as everybody knows, in Norman, of cycling. The cycling community is from the COVID families that were just getting out and new to up through, we have a fairly active racer community. Trying to balance all of those wants and needs in the context of infrastructure is kind of one of our first initial challenges that we started when we started down the path of looking at what might be the most appropriate or where appropriate lanes might be installed around Norman. I do work in Oklahoma City, so took it upon myself a little bit to go see some of Oklahoma City's. They have done some what they might term either tests or experimental sections with different kinds of protected lanes and different materials, different barriers, that sort of thing. So I kind of got a little bit of feel there in the bike lane and how that would all go. So the meeting where they did present all of this was very valuable for us, and it's going to allow us, like David indicated, to use their experience, their data, what they've developed to help us guide us, help us to kind of, I think, move forward a little easier, because it's going to be, it's a complex, it seems like it should be straightforward, but when you look at the big picture, I mean, there's anything from personally protecting the cyclists and keeping the vehicles, the bicycle and the cars apart, but there's many other factors that you have to put into place. With that, David indicated we had dispersed some information. Some of it is national, some of it's international, some of it's historical, of where other places have used different kinds of lanes, and kind of relating here. When you start doing that, it becomes, it is a transportation issue. You have drainage, you have structurally, you have problems with accidents, interactions with the barriers, things like that. So we did make a pretty good start on it. There are a number of them. We'll go through a few here. There's anywhere from hardscaping to completely separated, like the multimodals. I mean, that's probably the most protected mode, down to just signage. So we're looking at, the broad universe of everything that's available out there. And since we've been working at it a limited amount of time, we're also going to need feedback from the community on, and from you all, obviously, on where you're getting requests for what type of protection, what type of lane, what people have in mind, things that they would hope to see, and then try to put all of that together into a plan that could be adaptable and reactive to different parts. 24th Street, with just the lines on it, I've gotten so many positive responses from the old 24th. That is a route, and it's common coming and going for everybody. Probably familiar with the Norman Conquest, been around for a number of years. That's one of the main roads we bring people in on. It's been a challenge with COVID to maintain that. We were able to have a semi-official version this year, but the first time with 24th being complete, and everybody was like, it was great to do the Conquest, but boy, 24th. So they kept going. So the cycling community is becoming focused on both accepting and using those. With the green lanes, there was a little bit of a acceptance curve, and still is, and it depends on the level of riding experience and just your personal preference, things like that. So all of that goes into trying to develop not a comprehensive, but at least an adaptable plan.
Okay. Councilor Studley, do you have a question?
Just real quick, I'm curious, we don't have anything like that currently in Norman,
No,
right?
we do
Okay.
not. None of the.
No
I think that's
protected
an
lanes.
interesting concept, but I was curious if we had anything started like
Many
that.
of these are some of the states or communities, West Coast,
Bigger
maybe some
cities,
East,
probably.
obviously very commonly used in European countries, where possibly bicycle ridership is equivalent to vehicular traffic and things like that. So some of
Gotcha.
these settings and some of the experiences and some of the technologies we kind of have to look at and blend and work out. But there's the closest we have to protected. There are some of the, let's see if it doesn't. There may be, obviously, I think there's some armadillos in the city.
Oklahoma City. Right?
There's also some of the, I don't know what to formally call them.
The posts.
Yeah,
The posts,
Oh,
the floppy
okay.
post things. They have used some of those. They've had issues with I think both the cyclists and the driving community and other folks, professional drivers, things like that, delivery folks, have had some challenges with those. They all kind of have their pluses and minuses. Obviously, for a cyclist in the lane, the most protected, you're going to be the safest, but interactions with vehicles or interactions with the bicycles with that hard structure can also be problematic.
So the 2012 transportation bond is what introduced new bike lanes to Norman. And Cedar Lane Southeast was the first one to be finished. And then West Lindsay Street, and then 12th Avenue Southeast, and then now 24th. And then we've added bike lanes on West Main Street and with the road diet over there. And then some streets in Norman have, like Biloxi and Beaumont and Brooks and McGee, I guess were just happened to be wide enough that the city was able to mark bike lanes on those streets,
Okay.
but they weren't really built for that. But yeah, the 2012 bond is what started the new streets being built in Norman having bike lanes. And so we've added, I think, it's like 6 miles of green bike lanes or striped dedicated bike lanes since 2012. And so
There is one that's a little bit closer to some of the things you may see. It's not protected, but it is a double lane wide thing on West Rock Creek. Just
Oh,
before
yeah.
you head down onto the flats, there is,
Yeah.
it might be a half mile.
that was a road diet project too. I forgot about that one. That used to be a 4-lane street, and staff recommended that it be turned into, restriped into a 3-lane street with bike lanes.
And so you have the bike lane, but between the bike lane and the main flow of traffic, you have a 2 or 3 foot gap.
Yeah.
Bigger space.
And then you have striping to designate. So that one has been fairly well received by both the bicycle community, and it also is very easily to note that, you know, this is separate, but very little experience on that one. So
Thank you.
Councilmember Schuler?
I was just curious, when we decided to stop using the green bike lanes. That's fairly recent.
Yeah, that was April or May of last year.
Okay, yeah.
This year.
May of this
year.
Due to a shortage of,
Yes.
I guess that's what prompted it, was
Right.
couldn't get it.
Right.
That's what
And then,
put
and
us
then
over
all
the
of the
edge.
other
yeah,
plethora of things that you described
Yes.
on what the challenges are in using
Right.
And those,
using
yeah.
that.
so the first action was for the VAC to, when David brought us the information that they wanted to complete 24th, the difficulty of the materials acquisition plus the cost of those materials, it seemed like the most reasonable one, at least in May. It's like, we will not do green, we will not wait, we will not delay.
Yeah.
And so we did 24th with the addition of the extra, essentially symbols, bike symbols to indicate
Yeah.
more, so that people would, the green they were used to, but with more bike symbols, at least we hope that would
Yeah.
remind people that there are bike lanes out there.
I know as a motorist, I like the green because it's very visible.
Yes.
Like I can see it, I know where the space is, but obviously the challenges and the cost and the, trash and the, upkeep and street sweepers and all the specialized stuff, like obviously that is cost prohibitive at this point and probably not smart. But what are other ways to think about making sure that those things are visible for, our drivers, to protect and keep our
And that's
bike
kind of the balance that
cyclists
we
safe.
want to, I mean, we're the bicycle advisory committee, but we also know that we're also a vehicle on the road. And so we have to put all of that,
for.
those kind of demands and those requirements together. And to be maybe blunt, the green lanes were problematic for some of the cyclists.
Yeah.
There was so much debris, occasionally moisture,
Yeah.
other factors, which meant that the cyclists would actually avoid using them.
Yeah.
I'm fairly active in the
Feedback.
cycling community,
Defeats
so
the purpose.
so they were not counterproductive. But then you end up with a conflict of sometimes the cars don't understand that. Yes, that's a protected lane, but it's not a mandatory lane, and so
Right.
there's interactions, and use them safety, use them as much as practicable, things like that. So we're trying to get to a balance moving forward in all of this, and the green lane just kind of seemed to, like David indicated, they were very much in vogue, and there was a lot of discussion even on what colors and everything like that. And a lot of that I think came out of Europe. That was where they were initially first used. So we're just trying to adapt that to our community.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, trying a green bike lane on the road with the brand new Walmart might not have been the best thing.
Yeah, it's worn out.
And still construction, because that was
Worn
the
out
other
at the
thing, they were
entrance.
still, the new house,
The new, yeah.
the
Delivery
trucks coming and
driving
going and stuff
across
like
the-
that, and the green lane was not continuous, or it would hold, it tended to hold not only debris, but mud and other material that you didn't want to cycle through.
That is definitely the feedback that I have heard over the last 2 years or so, or maybe since we started putting them in, or since there have been more of them, is that, yeah, I mean, I definitely see bicycle riders use them, but I've heard more and more from cyclists that, you know, that ride the specialized bikes and thin tires, that we won't ride on them, where we avoid them. And then we've known about the issues with the, you know, street sweepers, and then the cost of them is, that's really been my biggest concern about them going forward, is that I do like the visibility a lot and the reflectiveness and all that, but the cost of putting them in and then the lifespan of them, just is kind of a real hard pill to swallow from my standpoint, I think. And so,
And interestingly, there's quite a bit of variability as far as acceptance of the lanes, because the materials are not always consistent from our perspective. So West Main seemed to be pretty functional. See if I can do this. The ones over on coming and going on Rock Creek, those were used more, but the material was just subtly different, and so there were some very minor things in both the installation and that, and I don't know the details. I know it is rather
Sean
intensive to.
might be able to. So the bond projects would have been done by the ODOT. Did they put the green bike lanes
I was
down?
gonna mention that, thank you.
Because those other projects, Rock Creek Road and then West Main Street, are city projects that we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a way, we became an experiment for the state of Oklahoma. We do that a lot here in Norman. Our first project, you mentioned Cedar Lane Road, was a federally funded bond project in 2013, and when we were doing the design, we actually worked closely with the VAC and said, hey, what do you think? In a way, colorized bike lanes are protected bike lanes. If the color is supposed to, you know,
Right.
stand out. And ODOT was very interested in trying that in Oklahoma. No one had really been doing it. And it was an 80-20 project. So we were paying 20%, and they were willing to pay 80%. So that's why we did it the first time, and the second time was Lindsay. And we've just tried them out, and I think, 8 years later, we've learned some lessons, and ODOT has learned some lessons. You're not seeing the colorized bike lanes in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. They've learned the same lessons, and that's, I think, why we're here today, to talk about other options. What else can we do?
Yeah, that's, I think, again, that's the feedback I've definitely heard. And I had thought, maybe trying to either come up with some sort of material to use to color them, or look at just coloring the intersections where, high profile points, but not having to do the entire mile stretch.
And that's exactly why we were so excited for that presentation from Oklahoma
Yeah.
City, because that's a lot of what we saw. It was just.
And I've seen the ones in downtown Oklahoma City that were part of the 180 or 360, I can't remember what they called it, but when they converted all their streets back to two-way and they added bike lanes, they did colored concrete, I think. They're gray, or they're a darker shade of gray than the street is, or something like that is what they
They
did.
have used some of the green
Yeah.
in both solid and intermittent, like you indicated too. Areas where there's going to be more conflict,
Yeah.
intersections, things like that. So they are working with that, and that is also part of their plan that they presented. There's ways to possibly use color on crossing streets or intersections that make everybody much more aware, but the cost stays down, and the issues of the material are not quite as pronounced.
Yeah.
I think the other really interesting thing we learned from Oklahoma City was that with this particular method, the linear posts as well as the armadillos, when those things get hit, it doesn't just take out either the linear post or the armadillo, it takes out a chunk of the pavement with it.
Oh, whoa.
Because of the epoxy that's used to secure it to that pavement is so strong, it's actually become stronger than the
Right.
street. So that's something to think about as we move forward with protected bike lanes as well. We don't want to create potholes in the road.
Right. So I would just share that part of the genesis too for this protected bike lanes is I've received calls and emails from residents in Eagle Cliff area because the bike lane that crosses Highway 9 for 12th Avenue, there's a right merging lane that comes off of Highway 9 onto 12th, and cars are supposed to follow the lane all the way down and then merge, but I've observed it with my phone and taken video of it. A lot of times when they're merging off that turn lane, they merge right in and don't tend to look to see if anybody's on that bike lane. So that's been the one I've received really feedback about. I haven't seen as big of an issue anywhere else except for right there because of it coming off the highway like that.
How about Lindsay and Barry? Same
Yep.
thing.
Lindsay and Barry,
That crosses
you know the one too.
turn lane.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yes.
right there where it
Yeah.
crosses the turn
Yeah.
lane. That, and then again,
And Lindsay at 24th.
and Lindsay and
that's a scary
24th
one.
too. So those three areas, but in my ward specifically, that 12th Avenue Southeast and Highway 9 one was the one that I was getting a lot of people saying this seems kind of dangerous. Do we have protected? And my immediately thought was something like that. You know, putting those just on a small little stretch of it, perhaps. But that's where it kind of.
And it's a challenge.
Why I
It's
requested
a
it.
challenge with the cyclists because you're aware of the speed that they're carrying, and what we're doing is going straight across using the bike lanes, but then we have to move over 2 lanes because we're going to probably turn back east
Yeah.
on Post Oak.
Yes.
So there's a lot of changing positions there for both vehicles and
It's a sharp.
bicycles.
It's a sharp little curve
Yeah,
from
and-
Highway
and
9
then-
onto 12th, and it
yeah.
does kind of
Because
naturally.
we try to stay out of the way and stay over, but then we got to get over
Yeah.
to make the
The lane is
left-hand
designed to
turn.
carry them on down halfway down, but
They want to turn into the apartments, they got to get over right away.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
no, I know that.
yeah, that was the one that got me wanting to take a look at protected bike lanes in the sense of having a physical barrier between
Here's
cyclists and
an experience that we will have to, as we develop this, work on as the committee, is as the bike lanes are becoming more common, certain members of the driving public believe that we have to be in those lanes. That if we're not in that lane, then we get yelled at, we get honked at,
right.
we get
Right.
haven't gotten physically threatened yet, but I mean, folks do get irate. So there's going to have to be some education, some training, and some that goes along with all of this, as we, no matter what kind of like bike lane we or what type of method we choose to protect the cyclists and keep folks separate.
Yeah.
So that will be our once we
Get the
bang the gavel on the map and the map goes out, and it will also indicate, and it will be updatable to indicate as new lanes come along, and we may be even able to adapt it to indicate what kinds of lanes, but it's going to be pretty valuable to the cycling community. It covers all of Norman, and also some of the multimodal, and as that expands, and then also most of the riding opportunities in Norman. So the map can be a real tool as we work towards,
Sure.
expanding the bike lane system in the future for Norman. Basically, that's going to be our focus. We got to get a few things accomplished. But I've been feeding information from other states, other communities, things like that. Oklahoma City, the timing and the details and the extensiveness of their study is really going to be valuable.
And they've offered to share files with us,
Yeah.
so we don't have to reinvent the wheel in that manner either.
And we work closely with ACOG
Okay.
as
Yeah.
well, so Jordan, and so there's a good
Recently driven down
communication.
one of their new ones. I think it's Walker, maybe going south of downtown. One of those where they've
Mhm.
they've put a street on a road diet. It was a 4-lane street. Now it's got some of the mix of protected and painted. I think I saw that where it's like green striped as it's leading up to the intersection type.
Some of them, and then some of them, they'll do a striping bit, and then they'll have a solid where the cyclist might be stopped, or so people don't,
Right.
they know that to be aware of that they're in turning and things like that.
Councilman Schuler?
Just kind of a logistical question, and I think this is probably more for Mr. O'Leary than maybe the two of you, or maybe you can answer. But as we think about what these new projects will look like, and having new protected bike lanes, and thinking about piloting them here in Norman and getting those online, that would come through as we do road construction projects. As we're like upgrading roads, that's typically how that works, right, through the process.
It's really, Councilmember Coleman said that this was adopted as a complete streets policy, really specific to those bond projects.
Okay.
Because we describe it that way, we budget it that way, and then it's really the details of whether it's grain or other devices.
So it'll be like our next transportation bond potentially, or can we?
You've got 10 years of a transportation bond coming, so
And can we incorporate it
on-street
into-
bike lane,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the next one, David, in that package of projects. James Garner, I guess, would be the next on-street bike lane.
So
that
as we
would go
develop
on.
out those
Yeah.
new
Right,
projects, we could implement these
exactly.
Think it
in
was-
that.
And that's exactly
Yeah.
why we want to get finished with this, so
Awesome.
we can tell those projects that are in line and the ones that will come after, this is what we want to do moving
Great.
forward.
Yeah, Northwest 36th, Northwest 48th, and Indian Hill Road, and then Northeast Tecumseh, Northeast 24th, north of Rock Creek, and then all those widening projects. It was either bike lanes or multimodal path, sometimes both. But
So it's helpful because we have adopted standards for everything, whether it's bike lanes or road width or whatever, and we're updating those right now too. We're bringing those back to council on a whole range of infrastructure topics. This would be one of those. But in the past, when these new concepts have come up, our BAC has been such a great resource to take to them and say, hey, what do you think about green bike lanes? And goodness, we spent hours and hours, and we actually tested, I think, 6 different products before we selected this. It was quite a process. They were great to work with. So occasionally these new standards come up between the adoption of other standards. But if you ever have any questions about why we're building roads or things a certain way, there is an adopted design standard generally for almost everything.
Councilor Studley?
So just trying to play a little bit of catch up with this and the BAC, what are their thoughts with some of these? Because I know you had mentioned that these are more common in like Europe and places where bicycles are more prevalent than even cars. And since we're a long way from that here, the idea to me of putting like those armadillos or the big, the blocks with the flowers or whatever, I mean, it's great, and I think that it would be protective for bicyclists, but I just don't think that that's realistic in where we're at right now. But I'm curious what the committee
I'm
feels.
gonna speak for the committee, which I guess is part of my role. And I'm gonna agree completely with you. I don't think as a cyclist, where some of that infrastructure, some of that hardscaping is used, is not what the way Norman works or the way Norman exists.
Right.
So I hopefully intending to move towards something that will probably visually and maybe in a limited way physically separate the cyclists and the vehicles. But I don't see planters. Multimodals, to be honest, are probably.
Yeah.
I mean, when those are, I know, very expensive and it's complicated. Those are probably the highest level, and those will support those wherever they're best put in. But I don't see much in the case of actually very durable structures or barriers
Yeah.
between, and this is me speaking personally, I don't know how safe they are for both the vehicles and the cyclists.
Right. That's kind of my.
I'll be on.
And then
The armadillos scare me to death. I mean,
Yeah,
I'd feel trapped.
that looks scary for a car and a bike.
Yes,
Like if you
and-
hit
and-
that, you're flipping, and then that's
Yeah.
even more dangerous
And
to me.
so,
And it rips up
uh,
the pavement.
I think it's more of an expansion of the technology and maybe a refinement of what we're doing now. Maybe try to figure out, there's all sorts of different ways of double lining, striping, things
Well,
like that.
and
Or
that's what-
mixed colors.
I get that the green is because of the glass and all that kind of stuff, but is there not, and I'm not a cyclist, but I mean, whenever I was a kid, I remember riding a bike. And so in my head, I'm thinking we have the reflective white material or yellow material, but I don't know as far as with like road legalities, if that's allowed for a bicycle lane or if it has to be a different color than the white or yellow lines.
And I'm going to have to, my understanding
And then
is
the
there's
second part to that is that material seems pretty slick. Am I wrong in that? Like the white really reflective?
Oh yeah. You worry about in any sort of moisture, if you're on a road bike, anything this wide, you can lose. So, and there are very specific guidelines, and now beyond my depth, I've only read this, for transportation specifics and nationwide standards for those, for not only, even the colors, there was a whole debate, I guess, on blue versus green and things like that.
Yeah,
so this has all been
fill us
pretty
in
much-
on that, Sean. What's the
There are, again, when there's federal money, sort of like our previous conversation about transit, when there's federal money, we follow the federal AASHTO standards, and they're very specific. Again, this experiment here in Norman with the colorized bike lanes, that's exactly one of the first conversations we got into is what is the adopted federal standard, and it was the green.
Okay.
We had folks who were thinking maybe blue would be better and so on, and you can argue all that, but the adopted federal standard was the green. It was a specific green, which we had a hard time.
And we
matching
had to
with the
submit
materials.
that color green to the Federal Highway Administration
wow.
for approval to
Okay.
use.
So anyway, that's
Okay.
kind of how it came to be.
I just in my head I'm like spray paint green. I don't know. That would then instead of using
So
broken
that is,
glass.
some of the red tape that can come with using federal money, and
So
it can
certainly
be
back
great,
to-
but
I think something that is effective, but at the reasonable level of technology and construction for bike lanes, not anything like some of the things that I'd never even seen one of the planters, because if you notice, the cyclist pulls up next to the planter and the cyclist doesn't put his foot down. There's a little
Yeah.
shelf
Yeah.
there that you like,
Nice.
good lord.
Where
high
is
class.
that?
And a little, I wish I knew. And there, and the little, you could even hold on with your hand there.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to know where this is. I can't tell from the vehicles. That looks,
If you look close, I think there's a drink machine in there too.
okay. And ooh, that was coolers.
think
We
it's
could
a
put
slot
coolers in the
machine.
planters.
Water fountain, yeah.
Yeah, little water fountain.
All right.
Uh,
Sorry, please.
That's wrong.
I really just have a comment because I was part of the, initial discussion last year, and I just want to express my understanding and solidarity with the challenges that you've faced as a volunteer committee through the pandemic. And I think you should be commended for as much as you were able to accomplish in a very challenging year.
Thank you.
And the fact that, we really experienced the same thing in the interest of public health and protecting employees and residents and everybody else, that so many things have been slowed down, and the inability to be able to have a quorum because people didn't feel safe and all that. So I just want to say thank you for trying to keep your original plan moving forward, and I'm excited to see the cycling map. I think that's going to be really an asset for the community, and this to me is just another way to highlight how valuable our boards and commissions are with the kind of work that you can accomplish even under really adverse conditions that are so invaluable to us as we, consider new ways of doing things. So just want to say thank you.
Thank you for it.
Yeah.
That is encouraging.
It's been a
and
trying
rewarding.
year, and I really When you think about going back to the 2012 transportation bond, I think the interest in cycling and multimodal transportation has only gotten more broadly applicable to what kind of community we're hoping to build in Norman. And I got to meet you not too long ago at one of these meetings, and it really struck me at the time of what a range we have in people that use a bicycle. I mean, it can be purely for transportation, it can be for recreation, it can be, people who really do this kind of in a professional way. And so all of those things are, I know, things that you consider. So I really am looking forward to continuing the conversation and, to see what other ideas are out there. And I just am curious too, of the ones that you sampled in Oklahoma City, what appeals to you personally for your level of cycling?
Right now, probably for me,
Uh-huh.
the limited colors at intersections seem to be, for both the cyclists and the vehicles, seem to be pretty workable. Also, one thing with a single lane separation between the lane and the bike lane, the one on Rock Creek where it's doubled and wide, that also has an extra feel and an extra kind of sense of protection, and you have a little bit of chance to miss obstacles and still stay away from traffic. Those sort of things, as I'm looking at, not only from my experience, but also, and through the COVID, good Lord, era, I hate to, we don't do that.
Yeah, we understand.
But more and more families were semi-restricting their recreation to just people they knew or people within the family. And I live over on the west side, saw so many more people, so many more families out just recreationally riding. And that's a major part of the community that we need to both foster, and these lanes, I think, need to take them strongly into account, as well as the established, the more experienced cycling
Totally
community in
agree. I
Norman.
think we're just going to see the demand for that recreational piece of cycling only increase.
And for transportation, reduce use of vehicles. I mean, that's a positive thing all the way around, both for people's personal health, but also, take your bike to the grocery store type thing. That make those opportunities and make those situations feel safe or feel like they can do that, I think is an important part of wrapping all of this together.
I think, the most positive piece of all of this for me is that we're now at a point, and have been for a while, that this is the whole way we develop a complete street and multimodal transportation is becoming accepted and commonplace. And I think even, at least the exposure we've had so far, even access to federal funding has really shifted dramatically in the last 10 years or so to recognize, what we're going to be needing in the future as we reduce the use of vehicles and all of the other modes of getting around and enjoying your community. So I feel like we're moving in a really positive direction.
It feels like we've started, but we're kind of at the early phases of a really, really, something has a lot of potential for many, many parts of it being positive for.
Well, it's really exciting, and I really appreciate all of your service
I
to our
am
community.
enjoying doing it, I'll be honest. It is exciting, and it's fun to think about. Not too much history, but in 1978, for the Parks Department out of the state, remember when all the first signs went up that said bike routes? I was an intern, and I got to drive around Oklahoma City and Norman going, this street will work.
Oh, that's great.
So it's a funny random cosmic thing that has come back after all these years, and some of the signs are still up, like over on the east side, just the green signs. And some of them were just a narrow little lane just to indicate that this was a bike route type thing. So
That's-
it's
Thank you for
it's
sharing
a little bit
that.
of fruition over a long years.
Yeah,
but
so you know,
that-
you've got the whole picture.
it was kind of funny
That's
to
great.
like, oh my gosh.
Well,
That's
we're so lucky that you're
That's
doing
a whole
this.
nother part of the bicycle education over the years that I've discovered is a lot of folks get bike route and bike lane confused.
Mhm.
And we've heard folks get upset over the years. They're like, folks that want a bike lane, or they think the bike route has been the city's answer to providing bike lanes. When no,
Oh.
and I explain to people, no, the bike routes are for
Mhm.
like advanced cyclists. They're not for somebody just riding their bike generally.
One thing on the map though, there is designations for basically recreational riders.
Good.
For,
Excellent.
and we tried to
I know
take
there's
in
different levels.
different
of
levels
bike
within in
lanes,
the
yeah.
map, so that people would feel comfortable using it if they're out with their family,
Mhm.
or if they're trying to get out of town to maybe go for a longer ride, or if they just want to go to the grocery store.
Yeah, I think it's important to remind folks too that the bike lanes that we do have, like we've mentioned, are just the first round of bike lanes we built in Norman, and you got to start somewhere. And for people to really start using them, they have to eventually connect to other bike lanes. And with the 2019 bond proposal that was approved, there were 19 projects in there, and I think maybe 15 or 14 or 15 of them might have bike lanes. So a lot of new bike lanes are coming to Norman over the next decade, and we will start to see more connectivity where people can say, well, I can use that bike lane to get to this other bike lane or this other path. And I think that's kind of one of those, you build it and they come. You got to build it first, and then as you do it, more and more people over the years will start doing it. So, Councilor Studley?
One more question, just 'cause I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding. So, once you develop the map, and then is the current funding then for future bike lanes from the city, or is it still being matched federally?
All of the above, Councilman Wright.
All
I
of
was
the
gonna mention,
above, okay.
Your Norman Forward program has $6 million in bike lanes and trails as well. So every chance we get to put dollars into the multimodal system, we're trying to do that, and council has really supported that.
So we still have federal rules that we have, or guidelines that we have to follow with these?
Exactly. If it were just city money, you've got a little bit more latitude in terms of some of the design criteria.
Right.
But yeah, the Norman Forward projects are generally local bond funds that are supporting that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I also echo the appreciation shown by my colleagues for you and the rest of the committee for your service, and very helpful being able to have a committee to give us feedback of people that actually do use bicycles on a regular basis, that cycle, that do those things, and I would just encourage that when the committee really takes a look at the protected bike lanes, as we mentioned, really the points I'm most concerned about are those specific areas where we know that a lane merges with a bike lane, like at Highway 9 and 12th, or East and West, Lindsay and Berry, Lindsay and 24th. If there might be some remedies for those specific spots to kind of, if we can keep cars from merging into the
Right.
bike lane as best as possible, or however it might be. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing overall feedback on what the
And
whole
as
system.
some of this is part of the bike lane study I also foresee. There's ways to route intersections and things like that do reduce opportunities for interaction between vehicles and bicycles. So that will not be the focus, but that will also be a kind of subpart that
Okay.
I think will be valuable too, to just
Yeah.
make cycling and both the opportunities and safety much better.
Well, like I said, just kind of wanted to get a update on where we were since it had been a while, and so I appreciate putting this together, and I think we'll look forward to hearing back some recommendations maybe at the beginning of next year.
For sure.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've got our third item on the agenda is a discussion regarding motorized scooters, e-scooters. We developed policy to address regulating these a while back when they showed up. And I kind of just wanted to get an update from staff on what's going on with them, what are we seeing, what do we know about them. It feels like over the last few months, maybe it just with school, I'm not sure, but I seem to be getting a rising number of complaints about them being blocking sidewalks and being strewn about along the streets. And so our rules do address those issues, or are supposed to. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to get an update on what's going on, and if do we need to update anything? Has there been any changes statewide, or really anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Councilmember Holman. We're seeing the same thing, the increase in complaints and issues, and so we'll kind of go through some data. And while my name is on this packet, I will say Beth has done most of the heavy lifting on the ordinance redrafting and all of those things. So it really should be Beth's name on this. I'm going to throw a couple of slides at you, and then we'll go on from there. So this is kind of a timeline history. Scooters landed in Norman in August of 2018. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years.
Wow.
Bird was the first one here. This is kind of by provider, if you can try to match the colors. So Bird was the first one that landed. Lime followed shortly after that. By about January of 2019, we had our limited license agreement in place that council approved. And then Gotcha was on there for a little tiny blip. They didn't last very long. And then in about January of 2020, Veo Ride joined our community. And so Veo Ride is the provider that has the contract with OU. So they're the only ones actually allowed to stop, park on OU's campus. I believe the other ones are allowed to ride through it, but they cannot park. So they have a exclusivity agreement with OU. So it's kind of a timeline. And then my next slide shows the total trips for all of those companies combined. So if you look, September 2019 was 48,000 rides. Wow. That is an incredible number. I mean, just think about that. I think this month, being September of 2021, I think we might surpass that based on the data I've seen. So that is why you guys are getting a lot of calls on this right now. There's a lot going on right now. So you can kind of see there's a little bit of seasonality to this. Yes, when August rolls back and all the college kids come back, that's really, I think, their majority of the use is in that area. When it gets cold, people don't ride them as much. When it gets super duper hot, people don't ride them as much. So there's some seasonality there. I'll let you guys know if we surpass 48,000 this month, but I'm thinking we will. So that's just kind of a fun little chart. Now, our fees that we collect from the companies are not based on the number of trips. They're based on the number of scooters deployed out in our streets. So we collect that on a quarterly basis. The fee is $1 per day per scooter deployed.
And just to note, and I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
that was a model brought to us by the scooter industry when they first deployed.
Yeah, and so thank you, Beth. And so you can see that, you know, we've collected a decent amount of revenue from that. In 2019, it was $56,000. 2020, obviously, the usage was down because the pandemic kind of plummeted in March of 2020. And then this year, it's still a little bit light, but I think it's going to pick back up. So each scooter company that we've agreed to let operate here, which there's currently the 3, Bird, Lime, and Veo, they each are allowed to deploy up to 150 per day. Most of them don't do that, and they do manage their fleet based on demand. So, you know, Sundays are a lower demand than like a Saturday football game. So just kind of, you know, that ability for them to ebb and flow their fleet based on demand helps them not have to pay as much per day, but also is good for us. The less, we don't want a bunch of scooters sitting around not being used. Okay, these are just screenshots from the apps itself. I have never ridden a scooter in my life, but I do have all the apps downloaded on my phone. So this is what you would see as a user, and any of you can download this information and see it. I've got Lime, Veo, and Bird. This just kind of shows where they're currently operating, and then we've asked them in some cases to block out certain areas. You can kind of see all those little red outlines are parks. We recently got a request from the Parks Department to not allow them to be ridden in parks, and we were able to make that change pretty quickly with most of the companies. One of them, Bird, just said, okay, send me your shape file of all your parks, and they were able to implement it almost instantaneously, which was really cool. I think Lime went in and like hand drew every park. So they are allowed to be in the parking areas of the parks, but this came up because I think at a recent event at Legacy Park, there was a little racetrack going.
Okay.
So we were able to remedy that pretty quickly.
And they just don't operate if they cross that. They shut off.
I don't know if they completely shut down or you just can't accelerate through. I'm not 100% sure because I've never ridden one. But my understanding is they just can't.
That's what I remember from our discussions back then, was that there was an ability to control the speed of them in certain areas.
Yes.
Like, they would slow down if you went down to Main Street and tried to run down the sidewalk.
The technology has rapidly changed since 2018, and there are a lot of things we can ask of them to implement. So we can do no parking zones, no riding zones, slow zones. All of those things are possible. So this was the first time we kind of put in a blanket agreement. We didn't have that in our ordinances, but it was in our park regulations. So I was able to, send them that and say, hey, this is the issue, and they were able to pretty quickly fix that issue. This is just one example. So on the back end, 2 out of our 3 companies provide a dashboard, which is really great because I can log in and pull some information pretty quickly. So this is Limes, and I'm just showing Limes because theirs is the most user-friendly. But this was just this month, and so obviously the darker red areas are more rides, but just to kind of show you that kind of heat map of where they're being ridden. Yes. I'm sure Lee's gotten as many calls as I have in the past couple of months.
Scooterville.
Yeah, so this is just kind of example, and what else do I want to say? Overall, how people are using scooters, they're using them
If you don't stop, they help it.
for short distances. So the average distance is about a half a mile. The average ride time is about 5 minutes. So just kind of FYI, that's kind of that niche that's filling it. And then just today, it went live today, thanks to Judson over in our IT department. We did finally get a little page on the website that has a little form that you can fill out when you have an issue. So that just went live today, coincidentally. So I think that's all I have, and then I'm going to let Beth take it over with the heavy stuff.
I like the way she said that.
Yeah.
Pressure's on. Okay. So we have a legal history here that, is interesting. This was just a brand new animal when it landed, right? So our initial step was kind of in line with what a lot of cities did. And so we developed a revocable license agreement because what we're dealing with here is a use of right-of-way. And that's really, as a baser level, kind of how we deal with our right-of-way here. There are permits for it. Like if we had, event permits, they would be filling that out, giving us information, and kind of reserving the right-of-way. There are other similar things we utilize. So that set rules and fees, and then they were allowed to operate generally as bicycles. And it was really kind of a wait-and-see period. Learn from them learn for us. Let's see how this works. And so we discussed, when we came back to council with a little more data, okay, what's our second step? And the idea was pilot program. We can get these companies that are coming, because they were increasing at that time, into a pilot program. You might remember, in addition to the 4 shown on that graph, we had Slider, which actually obtained a permit, never deployed. So there was a time where it seemed like, whoa, we're going to be getting more providers, we need to structure. And so, in addition to just talking about the legal structure of a pilot program that would transition into kind of an administrative licensing scheme, we talked about how do we like these things to operate? What kind of safety features do we want to ensure they have? And of course, all of these things are developing in the industry while they're, they want their products to be safe too. They have liability. So they're looking out for that too. So that's developing on their end as we're figuring out what do we really want as a city. However, after that pilot program discussion, the thing that derailed nearly everything, derailed scooters a little bit because, school didn't come back in session. There wasn't a whole lot of scooter activity for a full year. And And so, right about the time that it happened, OU had selected a provider for its operations. We anticipated an impact on our city operations, but we didn't really know what that would be. So we were still kind of in that wait and see stage, but we had a plan sketched out for that pilot program. And so there was a COVID impact on the use of scooters, a COVID impact simply on city focus for a while, and here we are. School is back in session, the students are back in town, scooters are being used again, and of course we had a lot deployed again. There was some speculation, will they come back? Will they test our market again? What has COVID done to the industry? What has happened to the industry anyway, just as a normal passage of time? So they did redeploy, and VAO is now in its second year with the university. And so, I mean, it's fair to say, these are here to stay, and we need to get these implemented into our traffic provisions, which has always been a part of the discussion. So that's very much something I wanted to talk about today that needs to move forward. But as far as the licensing scheme, here we are 3 years down the road and we have 3 providers. It's a very low amount. It's not like other business licenses that we have that have several coming. So maybe the format we have where it's individual licenses brought to council, that more contract format as opposed to administrative licensing, maybe that's a flexibility we might like to maintain instead of moving to an administrative licensing scheme that goes straight through by providers, because we don't have 20 submitting licenses every day. We have a select few still. So that's something to think about. How do we want to see that happen? But that being the case, with this low number of providers, perhaps that pilot program is just a little bit more effort than the situation calls for too. So here's our current fee structure. It's been the same since the beginning. Our licensing fee, which is essentially based off of space taken up in the right of way based on the amount deployed. 150 deployed times 2 square feet. I mean, it was a pretty rudimentary formula based on what we've done with right of way usage in the past. We tried very much to treat them on that license fee like every other person. Or business rather. And as I said, the scooter companies brought us their proposed impact fee of $1 per day per scooter. We accepted that, and that money goes toward shared infrastructure development. And it's a great resource for that, with what we're talking about today. These multimodal paths, scooters use those, a lot of people use those for various reasons. And scooters landed under the explanation of a transportation, a micro-mobility opportunity. They aren't just for enjoyment. So the use of the money in that way makes a lot of sense. And so essentially that was the proposed impact fee. Some different fee structures can be seen in other cities. There's, quarter per ride or similar structures. I don't know if we want to consider that. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. As Sarah pointed out, the $1 per day per scooter deployed, that encourages them to think about their deployment. If it's a quarter per ride, then they aren't harmed by throwing something out on the street that might not get used. They might throw more, I'm not saying that that's the business model, but thinking about preservation of the space in our right-of-way, that's something that I think probably works to our advantage a little. So I would say think about that before we fully want to abandon that kind of a concept. And then, of course, our agreement, again, based a lot on what the scooter companies brought us. We really did try to base it off of that. Had some, enforcement language as well as parking provisions. We've adopted those. We're going to get into those a little bit more when I talk about some of the documents you received. But essentially, we've beefed that up over the years. I think we've had one revision of the agreement where we addressed situations where we would have to impound to ensure that our administrative efforts in impounding, which are significant, would be covered, So the license itself, that was one of the documents that was added to the packet. It was added, I think a couple days ago. So, they are very rough edits. It was just things that Sarah and I had kind of discussed a little, and I'd been thinking over the last couple of years while we've watched, while we've had complaints, while we've had situations arise that we needed to address, and frankly, as we've learned more. So I don't want to tick through them one by one, but this is a summary. You know, a lot of them have live resources for their ridership data. And it's been extremely helpful, and for the most part, the companies have given us access to that. Our agreement actually required a lot less than we've been given, so I updated the agreement to suggest that we get more real-time live data. Now, I'm not sure that every company deployed has real-time live data to show. I mean, we might need to just see what's really available, but the suggestion is we need to make sure that we're asking for what we feel we need in order to monitor these in line with the complaints we've gotten over the years. And so this language isn't set in stone so much as it's just a suggestion to start thinking about, the starting point. Fleet size, and Sarah, you should jump in, but we've not really had a lot of increase requests. I'm not sure we've had any formal ones.
I think we had one before I was kind of on the scooter team in 2019. I think Lime did at one point request. That was when there was, I think it was just Lime and Bird battling out at that point.
Oh, okay. And we've had no suggested decreases yet, but of course that is again because our system kind of encourages them to monitor their fleet size. Again, another benefit, I think. No ride, no park zones. As Sarah said, our agreement really didn't say it very clearly. Now, of course, our agreement is revocable. That's another flexibility that's good here, because if we discover something very quick that is simply not working for us, we have the flexibility to make that decision in the public interest right then. So no ride, no park zones is something that's frankly, the companies worked very well with us on when we went to them recently regarding parks. It was surprising how quickly it was implemented. I've gone to them with other discussions when citizens have brought certain problem areas to my attention, and I've always received very good feedback and response from them about what can be done and suggestions for how they can help or how we can approach it. I have found the people that we work with to be very proactive, I guess. They've had to deal with this a lot, obviously. Scooters now have lights. When we first drafted these agreements, they all didn't have lights, and they were being picked up on a daily basis because their batteries needed to be charged. You probably remember that. Mm-hmm. Oh, technology has advanced, and these scooters can go longer now, and they all have lights that, make them fairly safe to ride at night. So, we have them out. And as long as they have those protective lights and other features, past council discussions have indicated that that's fine if they're, with the right equipment at the time, then that's a direction we can allow them to go on. So that's something that if we want to make it official, they can stay out after dark. We need to change some of our antiquated provisions that say you got to pick them up at this time and got to put them back out. Because the model has just really changed so much. They all are equipped for that now. Contact information. We have had complaints about that, and I really think this involves more a one-on-one talk with our scooter companies to make sure. We have to make sure that these phone numbers are legible. Yeah. They're legible to people, not just writing it that can bend down and look really close. They're legible to someone who's standing there and needs to do something about it, right? And when they call, it needs to be user-friendly enough that they can get to someone and get it taken care of. We have to get more information about how we can make that requirement clear and then clarify that language in our agreements or in our ordinances, wherever we're going to put that. That's definitely a high priority. Parking guidelines. That's in our agreements now. And again, those initial ones came from scooters that had already been deployed in other cities. Those other cities have different kinds of sidewalks, some of them much larger and more developed. Some of those cities have a lot more bike lanes. So I'm not going to pretend that what we have in there is tailored perfectly to Norman. I do think it could use some massaging and some insight. So while I have in these drafts you see kind of already shifted that language into the ordinance provisions where I do think they should go, I would say that it needs to be massaged and it needs to be, I think, clarified. Some of the language is a bit confusing, and probably we need to approach it from the standpoint of what should not be done. Because when it says you should be parking scooters here and here, well, some of those places don't exist in certain parts of Norman. We need to say, when you don't have this particular situation, how have we determined it's safest for you to do this? So, and I think we can do that. There's some guidance that other cities, some language that they've used, I think, that can work for us. So, again, I want you to see these documents as a starting point, but a very important starting point to implementing them in our traffic provisions. So, there hasn't been a great amount of change in state law, to tell you the truth. From the very beginning, there was the question, are these things motor vehicles under state law? They really, seem to have a lot of similarities to that definition. However, there is a motorized scooter definition, and it simply references a vehicle. It doesn't subcategorize it down any lower, so it's unclear in state law. There have been bills in the past that were introduced to make it clear that they are exempted from the definition of motor vehicle, such as other vehicles like motorized wheelchairs, e-assisted bikes. That hasn't passed yet, to my knowledge. So I think there's an acknowledgement that there's some ambiguity there. But for right now, we have the state provisions on motorized scooter. And you can see, they cannot travel more than 25 miles per hour. And of course, that is the standard limits we're seeing from these companies on their machines anyway. They cannot travel on a road with a limit greater than 25 miles per hour. That might be something that in operation, people really haven't picked up on yet, but there's a state law on this. There's plenty of roads in Norman that have higher speed limits, and we have a state law that's actually setting this limitation. So that's probably something that can, go into our thinking on, no ride zones or strategic areas to address deployment if we see that as being an issue. But I've actually not heard much about the interplay between these vehicles and that law in any cities. So it'll be interesting to see if we hear anything. And then, of course, the law, luckily in this case, says, hey, municipalities, you can regulate these within your city. And, of course, it's going to be based on our police power, public safety, health, and welfare. So, which goes right in line with, of course, what we're trying to do here. Sorry. All right. So the potential ordinance updates I've already mentioned. Traffic regulations, I feel this is very important. We've tried to be very clear about the fact that we are treating them as bicycles, but formally putting them into there makes it absolutely clear to anyone who doesn't necessarily call and speak to us directly about that treatment. Additionally, I think there's a big decision to be made about how broadly we want to address our traffic regulations. I'm kind of skipping around a bit, but this is really the biggest issue I see coming is the new types of vehicles we're going to be seeing. I mean, we know scooters. We know them pretty well now, and we've had some experience with them, and we're probably ready to implement them in, but does that necessarily mean the next micromobility device that's put on our streets, Right now, our revocable agreements are specific to scooters. I do not think they can be interpreted to include other vehicles. So I think there are going to be separate license agreements or separate regulations that should address those devices from a licensing standpoint. But from a traffic standpoint, we might consider addressing them now. The rules of the road, what consumers and users should be doing just for sheer safety purposes. So do we see them going in the same places as motorized scooters? Do we see them being incorporated into these provisions the same way? That's a discussion, I'd like to get some feedback from you all on. Of course, once we make this basic decision on these traffic regulations here, there's a matter of going back through, adding definitions that work for us, and then making it all consistent internally. So that's a bigger project at the end of the day. This is a starting point. And in the draft, these are some issues. Age to operate, that is actually in the draft because this was based on a couple of different cities that I've seen incorporate them into their bicycle provisions. And one of them had no person under 16 years of age may operate. That's something they chose. We've talked about age of ridership before, and there hasn't been a terribly clear consensus, but if it were to be implemented, that's what it would look like. I understand most, if not all, of the scooter companies themselves set age limitations. So generally, I understand that to be 18. So according to their rules, 16 and 17-year-olds, shouldn't really be riding them anyway. So probably that's not much of a conflict. I have seen a lot of provisions with cities encouraging helmet wear. We know that there are kind of specific laws in Oklahoma about not being able to require motorcycle helmets of adults. So I don't know if that has kind of led to a hands-off approach, but that's really mostly what I've seen. And then, of course, where to ride. Right now, they're allowed in rights of way, including streets, the bike lanes. Now they're allowed to ride in bike lanes, not park. Those are pretty skinny. They'd obstruct pretty easily. So we really haven't seen an issue with that, though. And then ride on sidewalks and paths, except as marked. I've added some language into the draft agreement on that, but we do have some areas in the city that say no bicycles or skateboards, and we've made it pretty clear that means scooters too, but I don't know, has the signage been updated itself?
I don't think so.
But the message has been received by the companies, and they've worked great with us on geofencing and dealing with those areas. So there are ways to do it other than posting, but we want to make it clear that we have the ability to mark those areas when we see the need arise. Okay, so I figured there would be some questions, so I just quick summary of a few cities that you may have heard of. In Oklahoma City, you can't ride these on a sidewalk or trail. You may have seen a recent article about e-bikes now being allowed on their trails and in their parks. In reading that, it seemed like there was a lot of likening, and I haven't spoken to anyone at the city about that, but it seems like there was some likening them to the recreational or sport use of bikes on their recreational trails. In fact, there was, if you read it, there was a quote from a woman who was, now I'm able to participate in this sport with my husband, who was able to take these tougher trails. The e-bikes allow me to participate now. So that was an interesting perspective. So that's something to think about when we want to think about where these mobility devices are being allowed. Is a scooter, how are we seeing that? Are we recognizing that it can be used as a transportation or mobility device for someone? And do we want to make sure that we're allowing that? An interesting perspective, I thought. So here we are. I think I've laid out a lot of areas where we need guidance. I'm not seeing... I'm sorry, everyone. I had a really fun slide, and I don't know where it's gone. It was really cool, though, and it had to do with the new devices, because I've seen several articles lately about the companies, including some that we have here, that are developing accessible devices for rent, which is, it's obviously very exciting. It's very cool. I don't know what the plans are behind it, and I don't know that we've seen those devices here, but suffice it to say they're also larger. And not just the accessible devices, but other formats. I was in Atlanta last year, or 2 years ago now, thanks COVID, and there was scooter, and then there was a bike, and there was basically the in-between, a short bike with kind of a saddle and 3 wheels instead of 2. There are lots of other devices out there that are larger. So I think we need to be ready for the discussion of where we see those going. Using them is one thing. The traffic regulations, we can address that, but handling them device by device is perhaps a good, safe approach, because we know that with them is going to come the deployment concerns. These companies are like a lot of transportation companies, like rental cars. They're using our infrastructure for their business. Scooters are using our infrastructure for their business. But the way they're different is that, they don't really have a landing point the same way. I mean, there's a place where you go to rent the car and you take it back. So deployment is always something that's very specific to these businesses that we have to think about before expanding to new vehicles. And so I know that Norman is very careful with its treatment of its right-of-way, very careful with taking consistent approaches to that. And so if we have larger vehicles, we have to decide, can they be deployed in the same manner? Or if not, where do we see those going? How do we see that fitting into our city? Obviously, making infrastructure available for the use of those is a very important thing. We want our citizens to have access to those. But how do we work with the companies in the management of their practices within our right-of-way? So, again, very broad topics. I apologize, but I really think that that's what I could use the most guidance on is, are you happy with what you've seen so far? Are you comfortable with this approach of moving away from a pilot program? And in preparing for other types of vehicles, how would you like to see us approach the conversation with the companies about that?
Well, okay. The main concern with these that I've had is the blocking sidewalks. Legacy Trail is one thing because it's 10 feet wide, but if two of them were there, then that would be taking up half that sidewalk. But it's our regular neighborhood sidewalks where if they are blocking that, it can be very difficult for someone in a wheelchair or a walker to move it. They might not be able to move it because it's pretty heavy actually too. So, so that's been the biggest visible concern that I've just driving around and then getting feedback from residents is them blocking sidewalks. And I guess with one of the advantages of when they were being picked up every day and redeployed was that they weren't just left laying around. And what I've noticed is there are some that if they don't get ridden, there's some that I've seen just laying over on the same spot for days or even it seems like weeks. And nobody's riding it, it's just laying there and we're not picking it up. And so there's a visual effect there too that isn't, I don't think, desired by most people to see those just laying around everywhere. And then the speed as well in certain areas, people feeling like they're zooming past them on the sidewalk on Main Street or in areas like that. So just a safety concern about the speed in some areas. And then I agree with some recommendations you made about not having the pilot program, but keeping a way to look at them individually like that since there aren't anymore. And definitely different types of vehicles that might come out, because I know we've seen the bikes, the electric bikes that are conceptually the same as the scooters, but they are a little bit larger. And so addressing those types of things too. So that was again why I partly wanted to get this update was receiving feedback, and as you have presented, we are seeing an increase in ridership again over the last year or two, and with that the concerns or complaints too. So Councilmember Schuler, do you have?
Yeah, I have a couple
Yeah.
questions. I can attest to the increase because I work on campus, and so they are everywhere. And I know that obviously these ordinances don't apply to what's going on campus because we're seeing the same things. I think speed and the blocking of sidewalks, just to echo Councilmember Holman, like that's the biggest concern that I have and that I've heard from others is that access, that right of way, making sure that sidewalks are, being able to be walked and accessible for wheelchairs and, other types of modalities and things. And one thing that I've seen other cities do in terms of parking or ideas, and I understand like people like scooters because of ease of access. You can roll it up right to wherever you want to be going, right? And so the idea of potentially having approved parking areas or zones that kind of congregate scooters in one area. And I don't know that that's everywhere within town, but maybe in our high traffic areas like around Main Street or campus or in our parks or something where we know that we're getting a lot of rides to and from certain areas, having some designated parking spots. Like this is the approved space where you park this scooter, to kind of take out that ambiguity of like, can I park it on a sidewalk? Can I park it in a right of way? You know, is it, what's going on? And so kind of looking at some language around that, I think might be helpful. And then I just had some questions about enforcement of all of this, because I think that people and residents, they see it on the street or on the sidewalk, and it's, you know, blocking a right of way and it's toppled over, and they feel kind of powerless. It's like, who do you blame for that? Is it the company? Is it the last rider? Like, what is... So I don't know if that's... if Deputy Chief Jackson has anything to say about, like, who is enforcing that, or, like, what is the method that citizens can kind of make complaints and feel like that's being heard?
Well, I know some have called the police, and I definitely don't want the police to be the
I
ones
don't
that have
either.
to respond to that. It seems like a...
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that would be, I have a couple of quick questions. So I know the last time I was involved in this conversation, it was a few years back, the companies did a thing called nesting, you know, when at the end of the day they had to pick them up and charge them. So is that no longer happening?
Yeah, that's what I'm curious.
We had one company that actually rented a premises to bring theirs back to charge, but the majority of them would have them individually picked up by their agents, I think to be charged in their individual homes as like independent
That's what they
contractors.
were doing.
Yeah, the model has changed, and
Yes.
so the
Picked them up
nest,
and got paid
Right,
by how many,
right. It was
how many they could
daily.
pick up. Yeah,
Right.
it was a whole like racket.
Trucks.
the nests
Say
were
racket,
points
but-
of initial deployment for the companies. Now those do exist from what I can see, because whenever you see a line of 4 scooters that look really neat and nice, you know that the riders didn't leave them that way, right?
Right, they've been
No, so the
deployed.
companies are going and rebalancing, but not at the same amount, it seems, because again, these devices have longer battery life, so they don't have to go out and charge them as much. It could be that they're relying more on GPS location to make sure that they're distributed for their business practices. But of course, a GPS location isn't going to tell you whether they're upright or fallen over, probably. So that's something that visual inspection is really needed for. Our agreements do have some language in there about they should not stay in the same place every 24 hours. That's not something I recommend we take out. That's something that I think we find a way to ensure we can enforce better. And we're exploring ways for that. PD has better things to do with their time. We all know that. So we're trying to find a way first to make sure that the company's access by citizens is really strong and it's really there. But even with that, we want to find some alternative resources. We're looking into that, and I think we're going to be able to bring some more ideas. So I would ask that if we can maybe come back for another discussion when we have some more well fleshed out ideas in that regard. But if I could also respond to both Councilmember Schuler and Holman, a lot of your concerns, Councilmember Holman, have to do with, I think, issues that will be technically addressed by traffic regulation updates about how the riders should be riding these, how they should be parking them. I think we can make things a lot more clear for them. Problem with that is enforcement. It's going to be hard to catch them when they're doing it, right? And so I'm not going to pretend that problem is going to be solved. A good example that I actually keep thinking about, I hope it's been solved for this poor woman, but she was an elderly woman who did not have the physical strength, and I don't know who does actually, to lift these things up and move them out of her
They're
driveway.
heavy. They're
She
heavy.
had an inconsiderate neighbor that kept parking them in her driveway. And I have to say that the scooter company involved was actually, when we got to the right person, was like, hey, I've got ideas. We can deal with this. I hope that's been resolved, but we want her to be able to get out of her driveway. And if she discovers it after hours, we want her to have some sort of recourse. But of course, it's very daunting, the idea of city resources for scooter calls too.
Right.
That's not something we want to overtake. So we want to find a way to work with the companies and to develop our own fail-safes for addressing those situations.
I recall us having when we did these originally, that we had was it if we the city contacted, that they had 2 hours to move them?
Yeah, that's in the agreement, and it's also true if a citizen contacts and requests relocation.
That's 24 hours.
2 hours. they need
Is
to
it
respond.
24? At midnight, would a citizen be able to call or contact?
Well,
And
so
then they have 2 hours to move it.
in theory, yes. Does that actually happen? I don't know. So every time I've contacted them for a citizen, they've been moved pretty quickly. So I'm not super sure on the citizen end of that. Every company will tell you that the best way to reach them is through their app, but we know that most of the people that want them moved are not going to be people who download the app.
Exactly.
So one of the things I've put on that page on the website really simply is each of the 3 companies and their phone number, website, form, user agreement, and then below that, parking instructions, and then below that, a form which will go directly to me. I don't check my email 24 hours a day, probably only 18 hours a day. So that's another challenge, is a lot of people will call me or Beth directly, or the Action Center. Action Center forwards them to me. I'm not in my office 8 to 5 every day. I'm out and about, as you all know. So it's challenging because I don't have a 24-hour way to respond to those questions. I mean, if I get one and it's 8 o'clock at night, I'll forward them to the company, but that's not always all the time.
Councilmember Hall?
So you both have really already touched on a lot of things that I've been concerned about, and I just am so glad that this was actually our topic today, because as you can see, a lot of the ridership is concentrated in Core Norman, and this has probably been the single consistent complaint that I've received over the last couple of months or so, particularly since school starting. So the first thing I want to address is, yes, ready to move beyond the pilot piece. Yes, let's explore the traffic regulation part of it. And one of the things that you said that really caught my attention that I have optimistic about is the communication and the receptiveness on the part of the 3 companies that are operators right now to address these concerns. Pretty sure the person that you're talking about is one of my Ward 4 residents that I heard from directly as well. And I think she actually got somebody's personal phone number that would answer her call, which is great. Because I'm really interested to understand how quickly the model is changing, because that makes so much more sense now in what we're observing and what I think our residents are seeing and are completely confused about, because there was this sort of incentive with residents to be able to earn extra money to be on it and get those scooters charged up. My next door neighbor did it. And that 24-hour, I think we were in pretty good compliance with that 24-hour expectation, because we had this sort of independent contracting model that was an incentive for residents to get those charged and get them back, where they needed to be the following day. So that is where I think we're really seeing that change in modeling, because I literally have observed on my own block scooters that are laying, and most of the time I go move them myself, but I do little experiments too, and there was literally a scooter laying across the sidewalk for days. And I've also noticed over the summer that I have seen trucks with company logos on them going around town, so I'm a little bit interested in understanding what their part of this is. And I think having the forum on the website is excellent. For our technology savvy university students, having the app is great because that's something that they're going to use. But having that ability to call a number and have the number easily accessible, I think is so important, because most of the people that have an issue, it's literally blocking access to the sidewalk. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking to an event and there were 4 scooters at an intersection. 2 of them were completely blocking the ramp, the accessible ramp for people. There were 2 more that were blocking the sidewalk, and that was in one intersection. And I did use the app.
Okay.
Because I was just like, I can't take it anymore. and it worked really well. I didn't go back to check to see how quickly it was remedied, but I used the app, I used the number that was on the scooter. Again, that's an issue for anybody who's got mobility issues. They can't bend down to see the number. It's really tiny. Making the number bigger would be great, like maybe even up and down the handle of the scooter so that anybody,
Or underneath it. Underneath it as well.
yeah, I mean, just
Skateboard.
working with the companies, I think that would be really helpful to residents because, you know, otherwise they have to figure out that we're smart enough to have it on our website and, you know, that we're trying to be responsive. That's a lot of steps for somebody to go through when their scooter is blocking their driveway and they can't get out.
And where on the website is it?
It's, if you go, it's just literally live of this afternoon, under the residents and visitors tab, and it's just in, I think it's an alphabetical list, and it says e-scooters.
So
Just say.
just to give you, you know, real live feedback, you know, I sent a message like at 6:30, I'm going to guess around 6:30 or so. Within a few minutes, I got a text right back because I'd called the number and you have to leave, you know, something. And, you know, anything we can do, how can we help you? And then I just kept reporting where I was seeing him as I was walking and, you know, just kept getting constant, where is it? Thank you, you know. So the app does work, but I think it's definitely a barrier for the people whose access is blocked. Most of that population is not going to have access to an app. So I think, you know, again, if we can continue to have a positive working relationship, and as the technology is changing to be able to address these, that is what, I mean, I'd like to see as the enforcement piece, basically, because clearly our police department does not need to be wasting their time on this sort of thing, nor does the city staff, in my opinion. I mean, because then that's just more resources that we're burning trying to make this work for everybody in our community, and the onus to me really needs to be on the company if they want to be allowed to operate here. So if they can't respond in a timely manner and they can't, you know, get these scooters out of the way, then maybe they don't get to continue to do business, or it costs more to do business, because if we're going to be spending this kind of time, then I want to make sure that, you know, the revenue that we are generating with license fees and the infrastructure fee is actually matching up with the kind of staff time that we're using. So that's, you know, pretty much off the top of my head, but it's really an issue. It's really a problem in Core Norman. There literally has not been a day since this uptick that you demonstrated that I haven't literally moved multiple scooters a day just in a square block area around my house. And I can. I'm physically able, but it's really hard to move them.
Councilor Studley.
All right, I have a few questions. A lot of them have been answered here, but just for clarification, because a lot of the stuff that I hear from the public is, the scooter's going 40 miles an hour down the sidewalk. So I saw in there that it said that there's a limit of 25. Is that a limit that the scooter companies themselves have put onto these scooters, like a regulator? It won't go past 25 miles an hour?
Yeah, I can't say I've never measured the speed, and I don't know if PD ever has, but we have been told that they should not be capable in almost every circumstance of going above that speed. Now, if you get the
Okay.
right person going down the right hill, I'm sure there are some laws of physics that
Right.
might bump that over. But otherwise, no, generally, that's our understanding.
Okay. And then another part, kind of what Councilmember Hall was saying about the cost of it, and with you saying about limiting the number of scooters that they could have in town, I like the idea of keeping the day rate per scooter, but can you have both, a day rate plus a per ride rate, if that would be?
I would say from what we've seen from other communities, we're getting a lot more than we might with other models. Now, if we said this is the only thing we're going to accept, maybe, but I think From what I've seen other communities, I think we're doing well in that
Okay.
regard.
And it is a
So-
proposed impact model. It's like, our administrative fees, we tie those to the costs that we're putting into the program. And of course, the money that we're getting from that impact is going to go back into infrastructure, but it does need to be reasonably connected and tied to those needs.
So are the scooter companies then, do they have some type of contract with us on the number of scooters that they have, or can they add to their fleet and take away from their fleet at any time?
The revocable license sets an initial amount, and we actually have been very consistent about taking the same initial amount forward every time of $150.
Okay.
And so there is the ability to increase and basically to do an addendum to that agreement that would document it. We actually, the first time that we updated the agreement, we made that an administrative process so that it wouldn't have to come back every time. And it's the city manager who gets to review ridership data and evaluate whether or not that increase should be granted. And if it's not granted, they can appeal to the city council. But if it's granted, then an addendum is signed by the city manager and the company that sets the new fee and the new amount and documents it that way.
And the reason I'm saying that is, to me, and I'm just one person, but it would make sense because we saw on your chart how it ebbs and flows, when obviously weather patterns will increase the use of scooters. So if it's during the cold or hot when they're not used as much, would it not make more sense for those companies then to come pick them up and store them somewhere and then bring them back out? And so maybe during 6 months out of the year, they're not going to pay that per day rate for the city, and it would get some of that clutter off of the sidewalks. Is that what's happening now,
They do
or?
that. Yeah, they
Okay.
manage their own fleet size. So if they know it's going to be an ice storm, they won't deploy any. They'll pull them up, or well, I guess at this point, since they do sit out 24/7 essentially, they will deploy less, or they'll pull some in. So yeah, that is happening now.
Okay. And then, how many accidents have we had in our city on the scooters, like where people are being injured?
That's not information that actually makes it to me. And I know that in the very beginning there was discussion of trying to keep track of that specific information. But I actually don't think that we've had the level of reports of that. I don't suppose
You
you're
can
aware.
try to query that and see if you
Yeah.
can pull up that information.
I feel like I heard a
Well-
statistic yesterday that it was like 36,000 hospital trips.
That's
They were
what I'm
talking
saying
about
with
they were talking about different
Not here.
different leading causes of hospital visits in the United States, and that
But
e-scooters.
I would think those companies would be able to, because I would assume that if an accident happened, it would be reported back to the company. So would they not kind of have that data, or maybe not? I don't
I don't know
know.
that we've ever asked them for it.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be on the dashboard. We're getting ridership out of there, but I mean,
Okay.
it's certainly something we can find out
That's
more
a
about.
hospital statistic. I don't
Yeah, I don't know. And then the other thing that I just want to bring up, I like the fact that the company has its own guidelines on age limit for riders. But I do want to bring up a point. Can't you ride a motorcycle like in middle school? Can't you get a license for a motorcycle at 14 or 15?
I think you can under state law.
Yeah.
Yes.
So 14.
I'm
That's
not
what I
sure about
remember.
that.
I remember a kid in the 7th or 8th grade riding one. Everyone thought he
Ugh.
was cool because he got the first car or vehicle.
You can get like a license for a farm truck if you're 12 or 14. I don't know.
Leave the property.
Yeah,
Leave
right.
the
If it doesn't, if it's just a farm thing.
I could see maybe off-road bike at 14. I don't know about. On the
That's what I'm
streets.
thinking. Yeah, as a dirt bike.
I remember
yeah.
there was some rule like he could only go at certain speed limit and only like to his house and to school, from his house to school. But that was, I mean, I'm old, so that was a while ago.
I do think those are rules that are in place for the companies, but again, I think that's probably a pretty big enforcement challenge if you have, someone with access to a
Kids,
credit card
yeah.
and the ability.
Yeah.
So I know we've all seen some violations of that
Yeah.
particular rule.
Right, right.
And so, while we do have different treatment of different vehicles, it's because they're different vehicles. Motorcycles don't get to ride on sidewalks. So, I
Right.
mean, there are distinctions.
I've also, not in Norman, but I've seen a video on YouTube of a college-age girl getting arrested for a DUI on one of them.
Right.
She was driving the wrong way on a one-way street, was one thing, and that's why she got stopped. And then they discovered that she was intoxicated as well.
that was my
And they
next-
gave her a DUI.
So for bicycles in Norman, that is a public intoxication charge as opposed to a moving violation or,
Yes.
yeah.
So then would the scooter be the same?
Does it
If we're
matter that it
implementing
has a
it that
motor
way.
With
though?
a motor on it,
That's the
so it
thing.
would be different. I would
Yeah,
say.
that's what I would think. Is
Well, then that's a distinction we would need to make clear in the code. So it's just another wrinkle to work
Yeah.
out.
And then my last, sorry.
No, you're
No,
fine.
Okay, so currently in Norman, I've seen them in the road, in the bicycle lanes, and on the sidewalks. I think it's very interesting that the state law is that they can't be on a city street if the speed limit is more than 25
Yeah.
miles an hour. And I see this all over Norman, no matter the speed posted. So I would personally like to see some type of specific language here, even though the state already has it, but something that, I don't know how we could control that, or how, if it's just report it, see it, I don't know. Do you get a ticket based off of, we're gonna call the company and find out who was on that scooter at that time, so it's not tying up police business? I don't know how that works, but I definitely think that that's a hazard, not only for the person on the scooter, but the motorist, so
So you're
I don't
talking
know.
about getting the record of who has already driven it on the street based on the GPS data.
Well, I mean, if we get a call that somebody's on a 40-mile-an-hour road going 25 mile an hour on a scooter, and they can't do anything about it if they don't see it, because I mean, they're obviously moving around.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how that would work, but
Be a different animal of enforcing something like that. Of course, when it comes to an actual moving violation, you all witness those.
Sure,
or
but
maybe
if we're
just
there
make
on
it
the
more
spot.
public knowledge. I think
Yeah, education.
communicating and public education on the rules,
Yeah.
I think would be very beneficial, and that's all I got.
think the reason a lot of those laws are on the books is to know who to punish when an accident happens.
Councilmember, I saw Councilmember Schuler's hand up.
Yeah, I'm good.
Were you done, Councilmember?
Yes, sorry.
Or, okay,
I mean,
Yeah.
just a clarification on the infrastructure impact fee. So when they decrease their fleet that they've deployed, do they tell you how many they have, or are you, so each day they're not paying for 150 as many as like they're allowed? They're telling you we've deployed 30, we've deployed 50, and so that rate will fluctuate with the day. Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
in our
Yeah.
dashboard, we're able to see that information.
2 out of the 3 companies have a dashboard.
Okay,
1 does
okay.
not, so I just requested an Excel file from them.
Got it. Perfect.
Councilmember Hall?
What was the last thing you said?
The ones
Excel
that don't
file.
have it, they'll just send me an Excel file.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we have, it sounds like a relatively simple way to be able to account for that. Not too much extra work for you. Okay. So a couple of things that just made me think of. So, Deputy Chief Daction, do you have any sense of service calls that you've actually gotten that involve scooters or accidents or?
Since in the last year, since I think this thing first implemented, I'm not aware of a whole lot of complaints.
Okay.
I'm sure we have them. I'm just not, at
Yeah.
my level, I'm just not aware of it unless someone reports it and patrol comes up to my patrol major.
Uh-huh.
But I can see there being a number of issues associated with this.
Yeah.
I don't know what the education component of this is. For instance, if you want to rent one of these things and you use it and you pull it up and start it, I don't know if there's an acknowledgement or an agreement or something that pops
Yeah,
up with
you
these
have to-
things explaining the do's and the don'ts. So
You can find their agreements on their websites for the
Yeah.
providers too.
Yeah, and I actually posted that on the page that we made for the website. So when you log on and you make an account, you read their user agreements. I think some of them you even have to scan in your driver's license. So I'm not sure if that's all of them. So
that
there
will
are.
help us on the enforcement end. As long as we know that there's some education component to this, and some kids just not picking one up sitting on the side of the road and put their credit card in and now they're driving the darn thing. It helps us a
Right.
little bit knowing that they actually know the do's.
Because
and
there's a
don'ts of
learning
the
curve
rules.
on those.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether people read the thing or not is,
Check
of
the
course, but yeah.
Well, I guess I'm curious because, your department would also be another department impacted. And so, I guess I'm interested in seeing if you can get any kind of feedback from your officers that you could, share with Miss Muckala and Miss Kaplan to, you know, maybe shore some of this up and,
I can do that.
yeah, because it seems like we need to really understand that the additional impact that it might be having from your end of things as well.
And maybe there's not many accidents.
Yeah, there
which
may
is
not
great,
be.
but that's some good data to know for sure.
And
There's gotta be some out there.
yeah, yeah. Maybe on maybe you could just look at any Thursday or Friday or Saturday night in certain parts of Ward 4. Just saying. Or when they're out and about anyway, attending to other disturbances at late night times. But yeah, so I'm kind of curious about that. And you know, I remember when we first started talking about this, we did talk a lot about the geofencing piece, and it sounds like the ability to be able to do that has gotten a lot more sophisticated, which is also a good thing. So I really appreciate that, you know, we've been proactive on the park side, because I think we actually talked at one time about geofencing Campus Corner, that you could get your scooter like on the perimeter, but that we were blocking off Campus Corner too. So we might want to be thinking about other areas in town where that might be helpful as well. And then the age thing, is it consistent across the 3 companies that we have now? Do you know?
I think they all say 18.
Okay.
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can check that.
So really they're regulating that piece. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I guess you just have to check the box. So I'm assuming on the education piece, again, I see that as a joint effort that we can certainly enhance and what we're trying to do with the website and those sorts of things. But again, that onus really needs to be on the company too. And I'm sure, well, I haven't looked, but now I'm going to. I mean, if you look, I'm sure there's something that you check and probably nobody reads it, but it's there. But I think, you know, just not sure if it's something we add to the website, but just highlighting the fact that you're really not supposed to be using scooters on streets that have the higher speed limit, the 25. I wonder if there's some technology there with the app and the scooter companies that might be able to help with that as well as this technology advances. So
I think probably one of the easiest ways to do that, and I've seen them before, but sometimes the companies will send out an alert.
yeah,
through
like
their
you,
apps, like,
yeah,
For example, last weekend I think I saw one, and I think maybe on game days they don't allow them on campus or something like that, and then they had some special event on campus, and so they did it, like they blocked out a zone for a certain hour, so they can send like push notifications through the app. So anyone who is a user in a certain area, I assume, would get that. So that's something.
Yeah,
to
and the opposite side of that, to a certain extent, in some parts of town, if the street is a 25-mile-an-hour street or less, I almost prefer them riding there instead of on the narrow sidewalks.
Yeah,
you know? So
exactly.
keep them off the streets with the high speed, keep them on the streets with the low speed.
Only we ruled the world.
Right.
And if we had 10-foot sidewalks everywhere.
I know we have at least one member of the public that came and had some comments about this. Is there any further comments from committee
I just
members?
had one other thing to add on I was just trying to go down your points that you were looking for guidance with. On the helmet piece, again, I don't know how that would we could possibly enforce that. I mean, that would be a whole enforcement piece on the part of the
Nobody's
city.
just carrying a helmet
But just,
Yeah.
you know,
That's not going to happen.
encouraging that on the part of the company. And I think there was a company that actually had helmets that you could get a helmet at some
Yeah, we might check and see if that program's still available. Again, some education on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then finally, just on the parking piece, I know we've talked about docking areas in the past too, and maybe, you know, part of the beauty of the scooter is to be able to have that, you know, door to door, and being able to leave it. But then that's where it's causing problems for the community as a whole, without the company having a quick way to get those to a central, you know, little pods along the way. So that's all.
I know when I was in Santa Monica recently in July, and I rented a e-bike, and it wouldn't let me stop my ride until I took it to a bike rack. It wasn't a designated bike rack for that company. It was just a bike rack.
Huh.
Anywhere that I could find a bike rack along the boardwalk. So that it wouldn't
So
let
it
me.
continued to charge your
It kept
car?
charging me until I put it where it was supposed to go. So,
Okay, that's
yes.
interesting.
Huh.
Councilmember Schuler.
Yeah, sorry, just about the age requirements of the company. So, Bird makes it very explicit that it's no one under 18 years of age. Lime, I could not find it quickly in their user agreement. And then BO is really interesting because they talk about their online services are not intended for anyone under the age of 13, but then go on to talk about guardianship and saying that nobody under the age of 18 may access the services without supervision of a parent or legal guardian. And so it's saying that if a parent were allowing their child under their supervision, so if this is something that we should potentially be saying 16 is our age limit. That would, because here they're saying that a child younger could use it
Or mirror
under
language.
their agreement.
Or
16
mirror
with
language of
parental
18
parent
unless
guardian.
supervised.
Unless or something
Right.
that's similar, that's
Seen
you know
families
providing
ride 'em.
some kind of clarification on age, because it's not consistent.
And then also state, but in all cases, you must follow the provider's own rules.
Right.
Right.
Right, if it's different.
Yeah.
If more strict, that is.
Yeah, because it's very different for
The
all of them.
other safety concern that I've noticed a lot, especially since I live on campus, is the dual riders.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
just like get a little bit stressed every time I see them, and thinking, what if the front like just snapped and both of you went flying? So I
kind of slow down
I
to
think
watch
it's
it happen.
I think it is prohibited in the riders' rules and in our own, but again, enforcement I know is an issue, but that's one of the things that
I see it.
I get anxious about when I see them doubling up on those
Yeah.
things. So, okay, any further from the committee?
No.
Okay.
And could I summarize just really quick what I'm hearing
Please.
from you
Yeah.
all before we
And I
move on?
think we'll probably be bringing this back to this committee. I think. So, yeah.
Great. Well, okay, so I'm definitely hearing a go on let's develop these traffic regs and probably look at them more broadly than just scooters. Get ready for what else is out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Another control we can put it, I mean, and that's going to be a good control to put information out there to consumers about how they should be driving them. Hopefully that'll help. Another opportunity is parking spaces. Explore where we can get these consumers places to park their vehicles. Now, I assume that we're talking about users. We're not talking about offering parking spaces or particular places for nests.
No.
We're talking about
No.
like motorcycle parking or something like that.
Where
Okay.
a user could
Somewhere-
drop
To
it.
help
Somewhere besides
facilitate good places to park them and avoid those
Correct.
issues.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to work on further fail-safes about making sure there's 24-hour support for people who need them. Public education opportunities, both what we can do on our website and what we can partner with the companies to do. Am I hearing that we are happy with the license agreements coming individually, or do we, okay.
We didn't really touch on that, but I'm good with
No,
that.
I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I
Based
do
on-
think I have your more discreet comments on age, helmets, all of that marked down separately, but those are the big ticket items I heard. Okay, great, that good?
I am curious how it would work in a neighborhood then. Like, because if I'm riding it from campus to my house,
No,
is that
in terms of parking, is that what you're saying?
Right.
I'm only suggesting in places where that would make sense.
Yeah.
Right, in like a high traffic area.
could we not say then have some type of restriction on the company that if it is in a neighborhood that wouldn't have like a parking area and it's left after so many hours that those companies would be required to come get them and move them out? Because I know
good.
for campus that would help, for my neighborhood that would help.
Well, don't we have the 24-hour, that's still in place.
So that's the rebalancing rule. It doesn't
But it's not
necessarily say
happening.
get them
Well, I
out of
know,
there. But I think that
Rebalance.
is workable. At least one person, a provider rep that I've spoken to, said, and it was in regards to that one particular poor woman's house. It's like, if you let us know these problem areas, we will mark them as problem areas, and we will keep an eye on them. And if we see something there, we'll get an alert about it, and we will go and deal with it before you have to.
But why should we have to do that? The company needs to regulate themselves. Why should we have to do that? And if they can't regulate themselves, then either increase that $5 a day fine, or like not a storage fee, but some type of fine. Like if it's sailing here this long,
Right, and I might have misstated. I think it was is more macro than that. So,
Okay.
I mean, you were suggesting that maybe we go ahead and just like kind of geo-mark or geo-fence areas where they shouldn't be left overnight. That's a conversation we can have, but
Okay.
something that's not quite at that level that had already been suggested to me was when we know about those problem areas and when citizens bring those complaints to us, we can pass it on.
Yes.
And they can mark those. And I don't know if, that's a little too discreet and we want to take a broader approach, but that's something that's already been offered and I wanted you to know that.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
excellent. Thank you.
Okay, we got a little bit of time to take some public comment. Mr. Dawson, if you'd like,
Okay, thank you.
give you a couple.
I'm gonna stand up if you don't mind.
Please do. And if you would introduce yourself and
My
give
bad
the,
knee is bothering me.
if you would introduce yourself and the ward you live in, Jack.
I'm not sure what ward I live in, based on what I read in the paper this morning.
Well, I think you're in Ward 6, but you're going to be in.
Or what ward I will.
You will
live
potentially be in Ward 4 if the boundaries are approved.
in. Okay, but my name's Jack Dawson. I was not in Titanic. That was.
Well, that would have been a good story.
I'm a member of the Oklahoma Bicycle Society. I'm not a member of the BLN, and I feel like I have to say that because it's kind of, it might be considered the elephant in the room, why aren't you in BLN? I've actually tried to join 2 or 3 times, but I've always had something happen that made me think, I don't want to do this. The guy that used to own Al's Bike Shop, I can't remember his last name, but Hank.
Hank Ryan.
Hank Ryan,
I got to be a pretty good buddy of his, and he was in the BLN, and he always was bugging me, you should join that. And finally I said, okay, we've got a meeting at Vans in such and such a time. And so I went to the meeting, and he was there, and I was there, and there were 2 other guys there. Neither one of those 2 were the president of the club. I mean, I just thought, well, no, I don't think so. But I've been riding bikes as an adult ever since 1968. In 2017, I came to the conclusion that I had done about 100,000 miles.
Wow.
And a lot of that was based on estimates, but during the 70s, from April of 1974 till December of 1982, I logged every mile that I ever rode, right down to the 10th of a mile. And so it was a pretty accurate estimate. And even if I was off by a year, I'm still way over 100,000. Well, not way over, because right now I'm not riding as much as I used to. But I've been super involved in bikes, not just involved, but super involved. I was appointed by the governor of New York State, which is my home state, regional director of the Empire State Games for bike racing. They didn't call it bike racing, they called it cycling events, but that's what it was. I was a member of something called the Onondaga Cycling Club, which was an established club back in 1974 when I joined it. It had been around for 12 or 13 years. And that's a long time, because when you go back 12 or 13 years from 1974, you're back in the time when adults thought that they weren't supposed to ride bikes. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, we had one adult in our neighborhood that rode a bike, and we all thought he was a little cuckoo. He turned out not to be, but a year after I joined the club, I was appointed to the board of directors on that club. A few years later, a lot of the guys in the club were a little bit dissatisfied because even though the club had time trial races every Wednesday night for 6 months of the year, we didn't have a racing program. I mean, we didn't do any kind of racing other than time trialing. And so I ended up becoming the founder and first president of something called the Syracuse Bicycle Racing Club. And we were very successful. I mean, our very first year of existence, we sent 3 of our riders to the national championships. And one of our riders was the undisputed #1 bike racer in New York State. And you know, New York is like 5 Oklahomas. Big population.
About 2 more minutes left, Jack.
2 more minutes left. Okay, just real fast, except I'm not real capable of it.
I know your
You gotta
concern
get
was.
somebody over here with a hook.
I know your concern was the scooter issue.
Well,
when we
yeah,
talked.
and what I'm extra concerned with now is big scooters. Now they got big ones.
Yeah.
And how fast can they go? 50? I told Sarah, who I had talked to on the
Yeah. Look out for
I
that.
talked to her on the phone a couple of times. I never knew what she looked like until today, and I just figured, okay, that's got to be Sarah. But I told her in confidence one day, I really don't think that motorized vehicles should be allowed on bicycle paths, period. It's just bad news. But I did confess to her at one point, I said, I could live with those things being on the bicycle paths. But what I can't live with is the idea of some company just setting up business on public property like that. And one suggestion that I've got, besides the ones we've heard today, is encouraging them to find their own places to set up their store, their unmanned store. For instance, actually Lime has been really good lately at on the part that I care about most, and that's the Legacy Trail north of Robinson Street. And a lot of problems out there, but apparently Beth or Sarah or both of them have been talking to Lime, and Lime seems to be pretty good about that. But if they were allowed to ride on the paths, the multimodal paths, which I call bike paths, because face it, they wouldn't be there if adults hadn't started riding bikes in the mid-60s. It just wouldn't be there. But as a avid rider of bike paths, bike trails, if you want to call them that, I call them paths, but I'm talking about paved paths. I've ridden every inch of every trail in Oklahoma City, and I'm a big fan of all of them. But they don't allow any motorized vehicles at all. And I think that's the way we should be. I mean, I love the fact that I could park my car, I could drive up I-35, park my car at the, what a good friend of mine used to call it, Pro Bass, the Bass Pro Shop, and get on the trail on the river and go all the way to Meridian, and then keep going on the new trail that they call the West River Trail, end up at Lake Overholser, end up going from Overholser up to Hefner, all the way around Hefner, and not ride 1 inch on public roads except to cross them. I mean, it's a great thing, but we don't need
Jack, our time is up, unfortunately, but we will definitely take into consideration that suggestion, and Oklahoma City's model might be the the one that we need to go with or some mix of it. But I expect we might revisit this next month or in November. I'm not sure, whichever might be, whatever is convenient for staff, but we'll definitely revisit this topic and discuss further some of the suggestions you just made and the ones that we did tonight. So I appreciate you stopping by to talk to me about it the other day, and it got me thinking why I asked staff can we get an update on scooters? Because it's been visible to me, so I definitely appreciate coming down and giving us some suggestions. We'll be back again next month, I think, to continue.
Thanks, but just one more little thing. Sure. Let me be a politician here and say, okay, and then keep going. Almost everything I heard earlier in the meeting about the bike lanes, I disagree with strongly. Almost everything. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm a big fan of bike lanes, honest to God I am. But in my opinion, Norman has one accessible bike lane. And it's less than a mile long. It's the one on Rock Creek. We finally got one right. But because it's this wide instead of this wide.
Right.
And plus there's another whole buffer lane right there, just like we saw, I guess, on the Oklahoma City slides.
Yeah. So that could be something
is
that.
what we wanted to come to this meeting for, to both kind of present where we're going to go and look at things just like that, Jack. I mean, and look very seriously at what's the best thing for the mix of roads in Norman. And
Well,
that one is a very good site.
I know my time is up, so I'm not going to go any further, but at some point I'd like to explain why the green lanes, like the ones on Lindsay and Cedar Lane and stuff like that, why they are not only a waste of money, it's not simply that they're worthless, it's they're dangerous.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like after what we heard tonight, we're probably not going to be doing the green bike lanes anymore, at least not the whole deal. So,
well, what makes them dangerous is the fact
slickness and all that.
They put motorists in a position where they have to break the 3-foot law.
Oh, right.
The law says you can't get within 3 feet of a bicycle, but when the car lane is only this wide and the bike lane is only this wide,
Right.
it can't be done without breaking that law.
Well, I think that's something that we'll be definitely looking at. I know there is a representative from one of the e-scooter companies. I don't know if you had anything you'd like to add.
I was just going to say I would be happy to elaborate on anything that anybody was discussing or answer any questions that you might have. A couple of things that I did want to just mention, some of the concerns, like the laying over scooters. One of the additions to our app that we use to monitor our scooters will tell us when they're laying over.
Oh, okay.
That's one of the updates that's coming.
Excellent.
So that's something we can immediately go.
So
and-
you'll
and
see that
address.
without a person having to call and say
Yes.
so. Okay,
Yes.
excellent.
That right there will really
Yeah.
address
Yeah.
a large majority of the.
And do you have speed regulators?
So Lime and Bird both do max out at 25 miles an hour. Ours actually max out at 15.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
and the large scooters also do 15. They don't do 50. they do 15 as well. As far as the charging goes, the Bird and the Lime, they do still have to be collected and brought in to charge. I don't know what kind of schedule they're on, but it seems like they're about on a weekly or so basis, once or twice a week. Ours we can actually swap the batteries in the field.
Oh, okay.
So we have a battery, open the door, take a battery out, put a battery in. We typically rebalance those at the same time. So any scooter we're touching to replace the battery gets loaded up in a van and taken back to a hub for a nest. Okay. Again, that's for us, for VO. The majority of ours are on campus. We rarely have anything outside of the campus footprint, a little bit on downtown Main Street. But most of anything north of Robinson is a no-ride zone for us. And the areas around campus where a lot of the students rent housing and live, we have that open for them to commute back and forth.
Is north of Robinson, is that your decision that you've made to do that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Just
And-
because
and
there
the
is a
main
lot
reason-
of shopping and whatnot up there.
Well, the main reason is, we just didn't get a lot of rides out there. And we spent more time chasing 5 or 6
I
scooters
see.
in those areas. So it was just wasn't efficient for us. And then as far as the parking goes, for example, I'll use Lloyd Noble's parking for game day, for example, we would find 60, 70 one or twosies all around the parking lot.
Yeah.
Because people ride them back to their cars and just leave them at their cars.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to combat that, we made that whole parking lot a forced parking zone. So there's 3 places around Lloyd Noble where they can park.
Yep.
So when we go to clean it up, we don't have to go pick up onesie twosies all over. We find 8 in this
keep
area,
running the
and
card
10
if
in
they
this
don't?
area, and I'm sorry.
It keeps running the card like he had if they don't park it where
Exactly.
they're supposed
Exactly.
to.
We'll not
I
allow
like
them
that.
to turn off
They,
their.
I mean, I use one sometimes on game days to get from my house over to Campus Corner, and they are extremely convenient.
Yeah.
And then the model is really built on being able to pick them up and leave them,
Yeah.
which, as we've seen, does create some issues. But that is kind of what the whole thing is modeled off of. Is the
Yeah.
Yes, we do use that in strategic areas, as you mentioned,
Yep.
where it makes sense, where there's places where there's obvious parking places where we can designate that. Neighborhoods, it's a little bit more difficult. But as Beth and Sarah alluded to, just when I get a call about complaints, I will have my techs first thing in the morning go down to the car, go down Chautauqua, go down, Flood, all those areas on the back end of the story fraternity houses, and just pick those up, and we'll rebalance them to campus. Mostly every morning. Occasionally, we'll have some issues with staffing and stuff that will maybe prevent us from doing that, but for the most part, that's a every morning affair for us.
So I've actually seen your vehicle with your logo, doing what you're talking about. So what is your boundary area, generally speaking? So you can take a scooter from OU off campus. There's no.
Yeah, like Highway 9 is a kind of a southern boundary. And she had the geofence up earlier, I can kind of go. Robinson North is where we currently have it ending, and then 24th to 48th.
Oh.
And we don't really get honestly much anything past like 24th. Like right now, there's one scooter in that area, and we've talked about even narrowing it down a little bit more, but pretty much that Highway 9 corridor, there's a lot of apartments over there where students live, and so we like to kind of keep that area open so that they, so we do get a fair amount of commuters that are coming back and forth from that area as well. But we try, my goal is to be as efficient as possible with our staff, and also not to be a nuisance to the neighborhoods around campus. And so that's how we kind of determine what boundaries we're going to cut off and what we're going to allow. Because we do want to be convenient to the students and the commuters that are using them.
Well, and we want it to work that way too. I mean, it's that whole kind of
reducing car trips, reducing traffic,
so
reducing emissions.
We obviously want to support this kind of transportation and that kind of use. So in the neighborhood areas, do you pick up every day, or?
We do, like I said, especially the known kind of problem areas. We make our rounds up and down, and either in the morning or in the afternoon, depending on kind of staffing. But some areas, if it's not a known issue, we don't necessarily get to them right away, but we do have a filter that if it has sat for 48 hours and hadn't been touched,
you'll know it.
It shows up on our map to be touched.
So just the sophistication of the technology is really encouraging, and that you're constantly looking at, adding to that. So here's my last question.
Sure.
So we get a lot of these calls because our constituents don't know who else to call, or they don't know how to use the website or whatever. What phone number should we use to get the ball rolling?
I mean,
The one
I have
on the
given,
scooter?
as she mentioned, I've given my personal cell to some folks.
Would you like to
which
do that with council members?
I don't mind doing that.
Okay.
So you're the Norman rep guy. You live in
I'm the
Norman?
Norman operations manager, yes.
Okay, cool.
And I spent 20 years in the newspaper business, so I have people calling me every morning when they didn't get their newspaper. I'm used to getting lots of calls about not being happy with certain things, so that doesn't bother me. But I'm happy to share it if it helps some of your residents feel just have a better feel about everything, that they have an avenue to reach out to somebody, and they're going to be able to see some results.
And I guess, I mean, that really goes to the staff too. Who would you rather have us contact? Because I literally have been using just the number on the scooter, and I am referencing your app. So I found it to be pretty responsive.
Yeah,
So
and I do agree with you that the number should be in a more visible place
That would
for
really
people to
help.
see, and I've
Yeah.
made notes of that to
Okay.
bring that up. But
yeah.
our customer service generally is pretty good. So anytime somebody calls in or texts, I immediately get a customer service ticket
Okay.
that comes
Okay.
right to my phone.
Okay.
And so our general rule is we will service those within 48 hours.
Okay.
If it's something that comes directly from your office or from a resident directly, then we give it a 2-hour deadline to get that resolved.
Okay. That's.
But yeah, I get 10 or 12 a day that we're out chasing those.
Okay.
As soon as they come in, I don't generally wait the full 48 hours. Generally, I try to just clear those as soon as they pop up. But yeah, if it goes to the app or goes to the phone number, they immediately generate a ticket that comes to
Okay, so
me.
you see that quickly. Okay, that's great, and I'm glad you're here because I think we've really cleared up a lot of things, and I feel like I'm in a better position to respond
Sure.
to my
Yeah,
constituents.
I mean,
so.
I'm always happy to answer any questions or provide
Okay.
my number for anybody that
Okay.
would feel more comfortable having a direct link.
I'm probably gonna have to stop recording, they're gonna start planning.
All right, there's
Gotta go.
Okay, sorry, y'all.
they're cutting us off, but
Oh,
please, if you want to
Okay, well,
stick
I can
around.
ask you.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, staff.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Who's